I'll never forget the moment I looked across the hall and saw my father sitting alone at my own wedding, pushed against the wall near the kitchen. It was as if someone had tried to make him disappear, to erase him from the very celebration he had sacrificed everything for. That was the moment something inside me began to shift. My name is Daniel Wright. I'm 31 years old, and for the past year I thought I was building the life I'd always dreamed of, marrying Emily, the woman I believed was the love of my life. But standing there, in that hall, tuxedo choking my throat, family and friends applauding, I realized that what looked perfect from the outside had cracks no one dared to see. My father, Richard Wright, is not a wealthy man. He never cared for titles or appearances. He's a carpenter, the kind of man who can fix a broken roof with his bare hands, the kind of man neighbors call when a storm rips through town because they know he'll show up. Growing up, I watched him live by a simple code: help quietly, never ask for recognition. He carried himself with dignity even when money was tight and opportunities passed him by. But Emily and her family, they saw my father differently. To them, he was a man without status, someone who didn't belong in their glittering world. From the moment we announced our engagement, the comments began. "Daniel, maybe your father should keep things simple on the wedding day. He's a good man, but perhaps he'll be more comfortable away from the spotlight." I told myself they didn't mean harm. I wanted to believe Emily loved me for who I was, not for the image her family wanted to protect. On the wedding day, the whispers turned into actions. While her relatives filled the front rows with polished shoes and expensive perfumes, my father was pointed toward a folding chair by the kitchen door. No tablecloth, no name card, just a plastic seat, as if he were some uninvited guest who had slipped past the guards. I saw him hesitate for a second, his hands tightening around his old jacket. But then, he lowered himself into that chair, his face calm, his eyes down. He didn't argue. He never does. That's who he is, the kind of man who swallows his pride to keep peace, even when he deserves far better. And I let it happen. That's the part that eats me alive. At that moment, I was still blind, still wrapped in Emily's careful web of reassurances that it's better this way, and we don't want to cause a scene. I told myself my father didn't mind, that maybe he even preferred it. But deep down, a knot twisted in my chest. The music played, glasses clinked, people laughed, but all I could hear was the silence around my father, the empty chairs near him, the way no one met his eyes, as if his presence was an embarrassment. He sat there like a ghost at a celebration he had every right to stand proudly in. And that's when I felt it, the first crack in the illusion I'd been living in. Something inside me snapped, though I didn't yet know what to do with it. For the first time in months, I asked myself a question I'd been too afraid to face. If this is how my bride treats the man who raised me, what kind of marriage am I stepping into? Looking back now, I realize Emily's game had started long before the wedding day. At the time, I didn't see it, or maybe I refused to see it. Love makes you blind, they say, and I was the perfect example. I thought I was marrying a woman who loved me for who I was. What I didn't understand was that she loved the version of me she could shape, the one that fit neatly into her family's polished world. It began with small comments, almost playful. "Daniel, maybe don't wear those old boots when you come over for dinner. Dad likes people to look professional." Or, "Do you really think your father will be comfortable at a big event like this?" I laughed it off, told myself she was just nervous about impressions. My father never cared about appearances, and maybe that embarrassed her a little. But embarrassment turned to criticism, and criticism turned to something darker: shame. Emily had a way of planting doubts like seeds. "I know you love your dad, but don't you think sometimes he holds you back?" she'd say, her hands slipping into mine, her eyes soft with concern. "You could do so much more if you weren't always tied down by him." She never raised her voice, never made it sound like an attack. Instead, she draped her words in silk, and I wore them like chains. Her family amplified the game. Dinners at her parents' house became quiet tests. I didn't realize I was failing. Her father would ask about my job, always comparing it to someone else's son who had a corner office and a six-figure salary. Her mother would smile politely at my father when he came to visit, but I noticed how quickly her eyes darted to his worn shoes, his calloused hands. I wanted to defend him, but Emily would squeeze my knee under the table, a silent reminder to stay quiet. Little by little, I stopped inviting my father to gatherings. I told myself it was to keep the peace, to avoid uncomfortable moments. But deep down, I was letting Emily rewrite the narrative of who my father was. She painted him as small, outdated, someone to be hidden away. And God help me, I believed her. By the time the wedding planning began, she had perfected the script. Seating charts suddenly placed her family front and center, while mine was pushed to the side. Choices about music, food, even the officiant were steered in her direction. When I asked about costs, she told me her parents were taking care of everything. It was a lie I swallowed whole, too distracted to question. The breaking point should have been the conversation about the ceremony. I remember asking if my father would walk with me at some point, or at least be acknowledged. Emily smiled sweetly and said, "Daniel, this isn't about your father. This is about us. Don't complicate things." Don't complicate things. That phrase became her weapon, her shield. Every time I pushed back, she used it to silence me. And I let her. I told myself she was right, that maybe tradition wasn't important, that maybe my father didn't need recognition to be proud of me. But on the wedding day, when I saw him seated alone by the kitchen, the words twisted in my mind. Don't complicate things. Don't stand up for him. Don't honor the man who gave up everything for me. And in that instant, those words no longer sounded like love. They sounded like control. As I watched Emily laughing with her bridesmaids, dazzling in her gown, I felt the first hint of something I had never dared to feel before. Suspicion. Not just that she didn't respect my father, but that she didn't respect me either. And then it hit me, sharp as a blade. If she could convince me to ignore the man who raised me, what else had she convinced me to ignore?
I told myself the feeling in my chest was just nerves, the kind every groom has on his wedding day. Maybe that was true, but deep down I knew it was something else. It was the weight of silence pressing on me, a silence I had carried for months while Emily's voice filled every corner of my mind. All around me, the hall buzzed with energy. Glasses clinked, laughter spilled from every table, and cameras flashed as her family posed like they owned the night. And maybe they did. The whole event felt like it had been built for them, their image, their pride, their name. I was the groom, yet somehow I felt like a guest in a celebration that wasn't mine. Still, I tried to convince myself that this was love, that Emily's polished world was the future, and my father's humble way of life was the past. She had whispered it so many times that I started to believe it. "Daniel, you need to think about where you're going, not where you came from." I nodded, smiled, and let the words sink into me like anchors. So when I saw my father sitting in that chair by the kitchen, isolated and ignored, I did what I had learned to do. I looked away. I told myself he didn't care. I told myself he was fine, that maybe he even preferred it that way. It was easier than admitting the truth, that I had failed him. From across the room, I watched Emily. Her laughter was effortless, her smile dazzling. She looked like everything I had once dreamed of, the perfect bride in a perfect setting. But the longer I looked, the more I felt something shift. Her beauty no longer seemed warm. It felt sharp, like glass catching the light, dazzling but dangerous if you touched it. I tried to push the thought aside, but my eyes betrayed me. They kept drifting back to my father. He sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands resting quietly on his knees. He didn't eat, didn't drink. He simply existed in that corner, as though his presence was a burden the room had decided to ignore. Every laugh I heard around me sounded louder, crueler. Every clink of a glass echoed like a reminder of what had been taken from him, from us. My father deserved to sit at the head table, to be honored as the man who raised me. Instead, he had been reduced to a shadow in a room filled with lights. And I was too blind to stop it. The truth gnawed at me with every passing minute. I remembered the times my father had patched my jeans because we couldn't afford new ones. The nights he skipped dinner so I could have a full plate. The mornings he left before sunrise, his hands already raw from the work waiting for him. He had given me everything, and I had given him silence. Emily caught my gaze and smiled, as if nothing was wrong. She looked radiant, untouchable, the queen of the night. For a moment, I almost let her smile pull me back into the illusion. Almost. But then my father lifted his head just slightly, and our eyes met. It wasn't anger I saw there. It wasn't disappointment. It was something worse. It was sadness. And in that split second, something inside me cracked again, deeper this time. Because if this was what love looked like, then why did it feel so much like betrayal?
The moment my father's eyes met mine, the noise of the wedding faded. The clinking glasses, the laughter, even Emily's radiant voice. It all blurred into a dull hum. All I could see was him, my father, Richard Wright, the man who had carried me on his shoulders when I was a boy. Afterthought, at my own wedding. Something inside me snapped. Up until that moment, I had lived inside the world Emily built for me, polished, scripted, flawless on the surface. She had convinced me my father was too simple, that I needed to rise above his shadow. And I believed her, because I wanted to, because I thought love meant trusting her vision more than my own instincts. But seeing him there, alone, dishonored, ripped the blindfold from my eyes. For the first time, I saw Emily clearly. She was beautiful, yes, but her beauty no longer blinded me. It was cold, calculated, the kind that draws people in only to control them. The smile she wore as she mingled with her family looked like a performance, carefully rehearsed. And I realized I was just another part of her performance. This wasn't love. This was strategy. A wave of shame crashed over me, so heavy it nearly took my breath away. I thought of the months leading up to this day, the dinners where I stayed quiet while my father was diminished, the choices I surrendered because she told me it was for the best. I thought of every time I saw doubt in my father's eyes but ignored it, every time I told myself he didn't mind. I had betrayed him, and worse, I had betrayed myself. As Emily turned to glance at me across the room, our eyes met. She smiled, that same dazzling, perfect smile, and for the first time, it made me sick, because I knew what was behind it now. Control, manipulation, a hunger for status that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with appearances. The weight of it all pressed down on me. This marriage wasn't just a mistake. It was a trap, and I had walked straight into it, blindfolded and smiling. My hands trembled as I reached for my glass of champagne, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. The bubbles fizzled against the rim, mocking me with their celebration. Across the room, my father lowered his gaze again, as if to shield me from the pain I had caused him. That small gesture, that quiet dignity, broke me. I couldn't stay silent any longer, not after everything he had done for me, not after everything she had taken from me. My mind raced, desperate for a way out. I could walk to the microphone and tell the truth. I could confront Emily in front of everyone. I could tear down the illusion her family had built around us. But each thought felt reckless, messy, like swinging wildly in the dark. What I needed was something undeniable, something no one, not Emily, not her family, not even myself, could twist into another lie. And as my eyes roamed the room, searching for an answer, I saw him, the mayor, sitting just a few tables away, his expression calm, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. And in that moment, I remembered. Years ago, when the storm ripped half the town apart, my father had shown up at the mayor's doorstep. The roof was collapsing, the rain pouring in, and my father fixed it with his own 2 hands. He asked for nothing in return. Now, here we were. My father, humiliated in silence, the mayor seated among the guests, and me, finally awake to the truth. The pieces began to align in my mind, sharp and clear. Maybe this was how I could show them all who my father really was.
My chest tightened as the weight of the truth pressed down on me. The wedding music played on, cheerful and hollow, but inside I was unraveling. My father had been humiliated, I had been blind, and Emily had orchestrated it all with a smile. Now I was awake, but what good was awakening if I just stood there, paralyzed? I tried to imagine what to do. The first thought was to walk straight to the microphone, take it from the MC's hands, and tell everyone the truth. To strip away the lies, to point to my father and declare what he had done, who he really was. But the image faltered in my mind. Emily's family would dismiss it as drama, call me unstable, turn my words into another story about a groom who lost control. I considered confronting Emily herself, right there at the center of the room, under the chandeliers. I could expose her manipulation, force her to admit what she had done. But I knew how sharp her tongue was, how quickly she could twist words. She would smile, deny, laugh it off, and in front of that crowd, I would look like a jealous fool. Another thought struck me. I could grab my father's hand, pull him from that chair by the kitchen, and walk him to the center of the room myself, to stand with him, shoulder to shoulder where he belonged. For a moment I almost rose from my chair to do it, but fear stopped me. Not fear of Emily, not fear of her family, but fear that it wouldn't be enough, that they would still look at him and see only what they wanted, a poor man who didn't belong. The ideas churned in my head like waves crashing against rocks. None of them felt right. None of them felt like justice. And then, like a flicker in the corner of my eye, I saw him again, the mayor. He was seated just a few tables away, relaxed, unaware of the storm raging inside me. But in that instant, his presence lit a spark in my mind. My father had helped him once, years ago, when the storm nearly tore his home apart. My father had been the one to climb that roof, drenched in rain, nailing it back together, so the mayor's children could sleep safely that night. The memory struck me hard. The mayor owed his comfort to the very man now sitting alone in the shadows of my wedding. My pulse quickened. Could it work? Could he be the one to speak, to reveal what Emily and her family had tried to bury? I hesitated, my hand trembling near my phone. What if he refused? What if he didn't even remember? What if Emily twisted it into another story about me seeking attention? But then my father shifted in his chair, his shoulders heavier than I had ever seen them. That sight pierced through every doubt. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about him. About giving him the honor he deserved, even if it shattered everything else around me. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, my mind racing. How do you even begin a message like that? Mr. Mayor, please help me? Sir, my father deserves more? No words seemed enough. Finally, with my heart hammering against my ribs,
I typed a single line. Short. Urgent. True. I hit send. Across the room, the mayor's phone lit up. He glanced down, then lifted his eyes to meet mine. And in that moment, I knew the silence of the night was about to break.
The room was alive with noise, but inside me, everything had gone still. I had sent the message, and all I could do was wait. My phone felt heavy in my hand, the glow of the screen fading as the text disappeared into the air between us. Across the tables, the Mir looked down at his phone, then up at me. For a moment, his face was unreadable. The clinking of glasses, the chatter of guests, Emily's laughter, it all blurred as I focused only on him. Our eyes locked. It wasn't a long stare, but it was enough. He knew. I remembered that night years ago when a storm had split the sky open, tearing through our small town. Trees fell, power lines snapped, and rain hammered roofs until they collapsed. I was a teenager then, standing barefoot in the mud, watching my father grab his tool belt and head out into the chaos. "People need help," he had said simply. Hours later, we found ourselves at the mayor's house, the roof caving in, water pouring into the living room. My father climbed up in the rain without hesitation, nails between his teeth, hammer in his hand, soaked to the bone. He worked until his fingers bled, patching holes so the mayor's children could sleep dry that night. He never asked for thanks. He never asked for payment. He only said, "It's what needed to be done." The mayor had never forgotten. And now, sitting in his tailored suit at my wedding, he finally had a chance to repay that silent debt. He placed his phone face down on the table and leaned back in his chair. His gaze returned to me, steady, firm. Then, almost imperceptibly, he gave a nod. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. He understood. I shifted in my seat, my heart pounding. Emily noticed me moving and tilted her head with that questioning smile she always used, the kind that meant, "Stay in line, don't ruin this." For the first time, her smile didn't control me. It fueled me, because I knew what was about to happen, and she didn't. The mayor whispered something to his wife, who gave him a surprised look, then nodded. He straightened his jacket, his expression calm but resolute. Slowly, he rose from his chair. The scrape of wood against the floor was faint, but it cut through the room like thunder in my ears. A few heads turned, conversations dipped for just a second, then picked up again. No one yet understood what was coming. I glanced back at my father. He was still seated near the kitchen, shoulders hunched, gaze lowered. He had no idea that the tide of the evening was about to turn, that justice was already walking toward the front of the room. The mayor adjusted his cufflinks, cleared his throat softly, and began to move through the tables. Each step he took seemed to carry more weight than the last. Guests turned to watch, whispers rising in the air. Why was the mayor standing? Why was he heading toward the microphone? My pulse hammered in my ears. I gripped the edge of the table, torn between fear and relief. This was no longer in my hands. The truth was about to have its voice, and there was no stopping it now. Emily's laughter faltered. She followed the eyes of the crowd and saw him, the mayor, striding with quiet authority toward the front. Her smile froze just for a second before she forced it back onto her face. But I saw it, the crack, the first fracture in the mask she wore so well. And then, as he reached the podium, he placed his hand on the microphone. The room hushed. Every head turned, every sound died. And in that breathless silence, I knew the moment of truth had come. The mayor's hand closed around the microphone, and the soft buzz of feedback cut through the hall.
The chatter fell silent, the music faded, and every eye turned toward him. You could feel the air shift, like the whole room had suddenly remembered it was in the presence of authority. He cleared his throat, his voice calm but steady, carrying weight in every syllable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I hadn't planned to speak tonight, but sometimes silence does more harm than words. And tonight, silence has gone on long enough." A ripple of confusion spread across the guests. Emily's parents exchanged nervous glances. Emily herself tilted her chin upward, forcing a smile, but her knuckles tightened around her wineglass. The mayor's eyes scanned the room until they landed on my father, still seated in that plastic chair by the kitchen. He raised his hand slightly, pointing without shame. "I want to talk about a man in this room," he said. "A man who doesn't stand in the spotlight, who never asks for recognition, but whose character has built more than any of us will ever know. Many years ago, when a storm ripped through our town, my home was nearly destroyed. And it was that man," his voice lifted as he gestured again, "who came to my door, soaked to the bone, and climbed onto my collapsing roof to save my family. He asked for nothing. He never once mentioned it again. But I remember." The hall was utterly silent. Forks hung in midair. Guests craned their necks toward the back, where my father sat frozen, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe the mayor was speaking about him. The mayor continued, his voice rising with conviction. "Tonight, I watched as this man was seated by the kitchen door, as if his presence was an inconvenience, and I realized something. We've forgotten what true honor looks like. We've traded dignity for appearances, substance for status. But without him, without his sacrifices, even this celebration you're all enjoying tonight would not have been possible." Whispers broke out, shock, disbelief. Heads turned, eyes narrowing toward Emily's side of the room. My bride's face drained of color. She tried to keep her composure, but I could see it, the panic, the cracks spreading across the mask she had worn so perfectly until now. The mayor wasn't finished. "Richard Wright is not just the father of the groom. He is a man who has quietly held up this community, who has given without asking, who has shown more integrity in his silence than most of us show in our speeches. And it is a disgrace that he was pushed into the shadows tonight." A ripple swept through the hall, voices rising in agreement. Some guests nodded, others clapped softly, hesitantly at first, then louder. The sound grew, filling the space until it was undeniable. Applause thundered, echoing against the high ceilings. My father lowered his head, overwhelmed, his hands trembling on his knees. He had never asked for this moment, never wanted recognition. But there it was, roaring through the hall like justice finally breaking free. Emily's mother's lips tightened, her father's face flushed red. Emily herself sat rigid, her glass untouched, her smile gone. And me? My heart pounded as the truth finally broke through the walls of deception. For the first time, I saw my father honored as he should have been. For the first time, I wasn't blind. But I also knew, when the applause stopped, all eyes would turn to me. And in that moment, I had to decide where I truly stood. The applause rolled through the hall like thunder, rising and falling until it filled every corner of the room. For a moment, I stood frozen, my chest tight, my hands trembling at my sides. The mayor's words still echoed in my ears, not just as praise for my father, but as an indictment of me. I had been silent too long. Slowly, the applause quieted, and the room turned. Dozens of eyes, hundreds of them, all shifting toward me. The groom, the son of the man who had just been lifted from the shadows into the light. Emily's hand shot out and gripped my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin, sharp and desperate. She leaned close, her voice low and venomous, hidden beneath her brittle smile. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare make this worse." For months, those words would have controlled me. For months, I had followed her lead, surrendered my instincts, and silenced my own voice. But not tonight. Not anymore. I looked at her, really looked at her. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced with panic. The charm I once believed in had crumbled, revealing only fear and control. In that instant, the woman I thought I loved felt like a stranger. I pulled my wrist free. Step by step, I crossed the hall. Each footfall echoed louder than the last. Guests parted in silence as I moved past them, their gazes following, their whispers hushed. And then I reached him, my father, sitting alone by the kitchen. His head bowed as if he couldn't believe any of this was real. I dropped to one knee in front of him. "Dad, I'm sorry. For all of it. For letting them treat you like this, for letting myself believe their lies. You deserved to be at the heart of this day. Because you are the heart of who I am." His eyes filled with tears. For a long moment he couldn't speak. Then slowly, he stood. His hands, calloused, scarred from a lifetime of work, rested on my shoulders. The hall erupted again. Applause, cheers. Some guests stood to their feet. The sound rolled like a wave, washing over us, drowning out everything else. I turned and faced the crowd, still at my father's side. Emily was pale, her lips parted in shock. Her family sat stiff, unable to mask their humiliation. The illusion they had worked so hard to build had collapsed in a single evening. The mayor's voice rang out once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us honor the man who should never have been hidden." And they did. I didn't care about the flowers, the music, or the carefully rehearsed schedule. I didn't care that Emily sat frozen in silence, her control slipping through her fingers. All I cared about was the man beside me. The man who had given me everything and asked for nothing. That night, I made my choice. I chose my father. And in choosing him, I chose myself. The wedding, as Emily had imagined it, was over. But something far greater had taken its place. Truth. And the truth once spoken could never be silenced again.